Hello, and welcome to another LinkedIn Live hosted by Optiv, your cyber advisory and solutions leader. I'm Sarah Faraji, a cybersecurity technical content manager here at Optiv, and I'll be moderating today's discussion with my colleagues Danny Pickens, Director of Incident Management, and Pradeep Shekhar, Director of Strategy and Risk Management. So today we're going to be discussing the grand debut of Optiv's third annual Industry Threat Report. Our experts will be sharing their insights on the top threats and adversary techniques across industries from 2024 and our predictions for which threats will continue to be prominent in 2025. We will offer recommendations for cultivating a threat-informed defense next year based on actionable intelligence that you're going to find in this report. So feel free to share any questions or thoughts in the comments, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A at the end of the discussion. So let's get started. The report, as you're going to see, it's going to be shared in the chat. It's divided into 3-page sections by industry verticals. So we've got healthcare, financial services, government and public sector, energy and utilities, industrials. It's a great report, a lot of colorful images, and it's a nice way to break down some of these threats. You have so many, I know, threat feeds that are coming in all year long, and so this distills, or what were the top things to focus on in 2024. And so for each vertical, we're going to be looking into, not only what the threats were, but what were some capability trends in these industries? What was accelerating innovation, but what also might be contributing to an expanding attack surface that we can address? So let's start with a focus on one particular vertical that you're going to see in the report, which is the healthcare industry. So as many of you know, the integration of IoT, or Internet of Things, and IoMT, Internet of Medical Things devices, and remote patient monitoring, mobile health, all of these things are great because they're helping to improve patient outcomes and accessibility. But we're also seeing a greater need to standardize security protocols in these areas as risk exposure increases. So my first question for this group is, because healthcare organizations are often leveraging thousands of different workstations and these specialized medical devices, mobile cloud-based services, all these new things that we're seeing, how are threat actors taking advantage of an expanded and interconnected attack surface?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. And yes, the healthcare industry is a great place to start a discussion, right? So we're seeing increasing adoption of not just digital technologies, but like you rightly pointed out, interconnected medical devices, as well as the prevalence of cloud-based systems, which is putting not only the sensitive patient data, but also critical infrastructure. Now, threat actors today, they're exploiting and they're targeting not just interconnected medical devices with vulnerabilities, but they're also looking at and targeting third-party vendors as well as service providers of these different healthcare systems. And with the move to cloud, we're also seeing threat actors looking for misconfigured cloud services so that they can target electronic health records, which is going at a premium in the dark web, right? Because of the sensitive personal as well as financial information that they tend to contain. Now, what we continue are initial access brokers, which is the most common adversarial threat, if you would, leading to in the forms of ransomware as well as business email compromise. Now, at a high level, initial access is getting accomplished via publicly exposed as well as insecure systems and services. Now, these are areas that we are observing where threat actors are actively exploiting the attack surface today.
Yeah, great points about how threat actors are continuing to gain initial access to these interconnected medical devices, and they're exploiting vulnerabilities at different points in the supply chain to get that access. And you mentioned these initial access brokers, or IABs. That's how the adversary threat landscape is shifting, right? We're seeing more specialized, those who are specialized in initial access, and then they can sell off that access to other organizations. So interesting how there's there's a lot of shifts in that landscape. And Danny, what I wanted to ask you as well is, what are we seeing as primary motivations for threat actors, including IABs, who continue to target the healthcare industry year over year?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And Pradeep, great points, right? I mean, when we look at initial access brokers being the predominant threat against healthcare organizations, it really comes down to data and access is money, right? Initial access brokers gain access so they can sell that access off to another threat actor group to conduct their follow-on attacks. But for those secondary groups, the data is really what they're after, whether it's PHI, other sensitive data, prescription data. Um, that's what they're really after. Exfiltrate the data, maybe do a double extortion type campaign via ransomware as well as data exfiltration and holding that data hostage. Um, when we look at the sensitivity of the data that is really being targeted, um, one thing that we really need to point out is not only are the adversaries trying to get in there and shut things down via ransomware, hold the data hostage, hold the hospital or the organization hostage. Um, a lot of the pressure that we're seeing is really on how do we maintain business continuity? How do we maintain access to patients' health? And so I think that should be a very, very big area of concentration for healthcare organizations, not necessarily 100% on the adversaries and their means of exploitation and access into the organization, but how do we maintain business continuity? How do we maintain access into that sensitive data? How do we maintain operations as an attack continues to unfold?
Yeah, I think that recovery piece is going to be so important. And how do you maintain that business continuity and disaster recovery and make sure that you maintain these things? We're going to continue to discuss some recovery strategies in this conversation. And what I love about this industry threat profile in this report is that as you're reading it, you're not only seeing summaries of some of the top threats and adversary techniques, but you're also seeing recommendations and security controls that we recommend implementing across each individual vertical or industry. And so when it comes to implementing security controls for healthcare specifically, what would you say, Danny, starting with you, are the top areas for cyber investment priorities in this industry?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that we've seen over the past year and we'll continue to see as we move into 2025 very, very shortly here, identity, right? Identity is one of those key areas of focus that you're going to see a lot of organizations, especially healthcare organizations, really try to concentrate on from an investment prioritization. I also anticipate a large amount of investment around other controls, such as looking at end of life systems. We're looking at technical rationalizations. We're looking at tooling considerations. Where can we find overlaps and capabilities of tools that we have and really go through and try and prioritize and focus a little bit more on how do we have the right types of tools with the right types of capabilities based off of the profiles that we're seeing in this report today to really provide the best coverage for an organization.
Absolutely. I think that we see year over year a lot of investments in cybersecurity tools. We saw that in our report that we released earlier this year, the Ponemon report. But at the same time, it's equally important that we think about having the right tools for the right purposes and having that rationalization piece. And Pradeep, can you share any other security controls that you think are going to be important based on what we were seeing in the industry threat profile?
Yeah, sure, Sarah. And like Danny mentioned, so this report is structured in terms of identifying what are the crown jewels within each industry that we see, but also identifying what are relevant today for that particular industry as well as the controls, right? Which is what we are going towards. Now, for the healthcare industry specifically, we have identified personal health information as well as the healthcare network and patient care systems to be determined as crown jewels that the industry looks at and wants to protect the most. And when you look at the techniques, we have seen prominence in terms of ransomware and phishing attack vectors being very prevalent in this particular industry. Now, given the starting to see the investments moving towards an increased focus on implementing data security related controls within organizations, even controls around email and web browser protections, as well as manners and skills training, not just for employees, but also for executives. Now, continuous education of staff about phishing and social engineering tactics that we are seeing in the industry is paramount for cyber hygiene in this particular industry. Also, we are seeing a growing need for enhancing security around the use of service providers, which we're seeing it is it's a very common thing wherein we have seen a lot of service providers being leveraged by healthcare organizations, and also to help them protect risks of exposure from these third parties that are serving them. One of the key things that is to this particular industry is also the use of patient care systems, right, which is Internet of Medical Things. Now, that also has its own set of risks when it comes to the hardware and software supply chain security risks. So these are areas where we are starting to see a lot of cyber investments that are being prioritized for this particular industry.
Yeah, I really like the focus on continually see phishing, and these types of threats are year over year the top threats. And so investing in email security and training around phishing and seeing how it evolves. I know at Optiv we've been talking a lot about the email security training that is not just a passive video, but it's something that you're continually tested on, have to kind of stretch your muscles and be thinking. And so lots of different ways that we can think about those controls. I see that being especially important in healthcare. I mean, you have so many different employees and people who can access that, who are full-time or part-time, who are accessing these devices, and having some kind of training before you're able to access those systems is so important. And now I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about another industry, the financial services industry, which is covered in this industry threat profile. And so we are seeing, in terms of top tech trends, embrace of digital transformation driven by technological advancements and evolving regulatory requirements. And we're also seeing that organizations are looking to more seamless, personalized, and frictionless access to services through open banking, and those involve API-driven solutions. And due to the extensive digital transactions and the impact that a ransomware attack could have and on the financial services organizations, threat actors are continuing to find this vertical to be an attractive target. And we have some visuals. Thank you for showing there. We have these heat maps, which are wonderful in the industry threat part. This is something, the design is a bit new that we haven't released before. And so you can actually see, if you're an organization that may have a wide geographic presence, you can look at these heat maps and see where are the highest concentrations of threats and where are the lowest. So looking at this heat map, we see the Asia Pacific region has the highest concentration of cyber attacks. That's the one in the red, and orange is second highest incident density. So that would be North America. And so we're also seeing North America, Europe, Middle East, Africa regions, they're experiencing more of a moderate risk. And to protect financial data, online transactions, and interconnected systems, and defending against supply chain and ransomware attack vectors in the industry, we can see how in this heat map and then in the control heat map that you will also be able to see in the report, we're going to be looking at how data protection is really important and increasing malware defenses. And so my question, looking at this heat map as a point for the discussion, starting with Danny, the APAC region was a prominent hotspot for cyber attacks in this industry, as we've mentioned. Is this a new or a long-standing trend, and why is it a top target for threat actors?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I'm really interested to hear Pradeep's take on this here in a moment, as he resides in the region. But I don't think that this is a new trend, right? It kind of shocks us a little bit, at least on our side of the world here, when we see that North America isn't the only targeted area geographically in the world. But there could be a few reasons why APAC stands out here, right? Especially given somewhat of the geopolitical climate that we've seen over the past 18 to 24, 36 months in the region. There's a rise of tensions currently that we're seeing out of North Korea. There's a more forceful approach in regards to Taiwan from China. And there's still a ton of eyes that are things that are happening just north of this region as you look at, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. When you look at, state-sponsored actors, you look at financially motivated actors, they're going to put some focus on this region. I'm interested to keep an eye on it over the next 12 to 24 months as we see things continue to unfold geopolitically, globally, as a new administration comes in. here in the United States. Hopefully, we see some cease and hostilities in the region and in that half of the world. But we're going to have to see what policies get put in place, right? You've got an incoming American administration that's talking very, very heavily about financial sanctions. They're talking about tariffs in the region that could cause a lot more state-sponsored activity in the financial services region globally. So I'll be interested to see what happens. And Pradeep, obviously, very, very super interested to hear what your take is on this particular topic.
Yeah, sure, Danny. And I pretty much echo what you've already did observe, right? So first, this particular region, we have seen rapid digital transformation and fintech growth that's happening across the Asia Pacific region. Now, this region has seen explosive growth when it comes to areas such as digital banking, mobile payments, and fintech solutions, where what we are seeing today is the implementation of security measures. It's not keeping in alignment with the pace of innovation. To like India, China, and several others in Southeast Asia, they rely heavily on mobile payment systems transact on a day-to-day basis across retail chains as well as normal general transactions, if you would. Now, what this has done is there's increasing cases of malware, phishing, as well as social engineering attacks against individuals as well as organizations in this. One of the reasons why you're seeing this particular graphic. So this concentration is pretty much showing the number of attacks that we're seeing, and it's heavily concentrated here because it's pretty obvious that this is a heavily populated region of the world right now. And with respect to the number of changes and the innovation that's happening across organizations, across people, having financial inclusion across each of these different countries, we are seeing that more and more people and more criminals, cyber criminals, getting enticed to attack and target individuals here as well. Now, this region, like you mentioned, Danny, is also a hotspot for geopolitical conflicts with China and North Korea and a few other nations. And what we're seeing threat actors target is financial institutions, predominantly not just to fund their operations, but also to cause economic disruptions, right? Now, I know Sarah touched upon cybersecurity regulations. Now, we have also seen a number of cybersecurity regulations being produced, established, but also the enforcement of these regulations, they are varying widely across these different countries, right? And these, I would say, the differences in how these is also creating some weak link regional financial ecosystems work today. And last but not the least, I know this is a common pain point across industries, which is the demand for skilled cybersecurity talent. But one of the things that we have seen is with respect to the demand for skilled cybersecurity talent in APAC, that far by leaving many financial institutions as well as other institutions vulnerable. Now, I think these are predominantly the reasons why we are seeing this particular region having a higher concentration of cyber attacks. And until we mitigate some of these, I believe it's going to continue.
Excellent insights. I really like this discussion about both the state-sponsored and the financially motivated threat actors are seeing a lot of potential in this region for being able to make gains, whether it's espionage or to make financial gains. And I also like that you touched on regulations and changes in the continued the supply and need for cybersecurity talent. All of this is really important to think about as we try to understand why there's a higher concentration in this region. It's a lot of moving parts, lots of growth in this region, and other factors making it an attractive target. And so thinking about kind of controls and the what do we do about this, we continually see ransomware is a top concern in the APAC region as well as other regions when it comes to financial services in that particular vertical. And what I've found interesting in the industry threat profile as well as in other research is how the ransomware is still a problem, but what is specifically a trend that is evolving in the ransomware landscape is that threat actors are also targeting the backups. So that makes it more difficult for organizations to recover. We were talking earlier about that business continuity process, and it's much more difficult to get your business back up and running as usual when threat actors are targeting not only the systems but the backups too. So Pradeep, starting with you, do you imagine that these ransomware trends are going to continue to rise in 2025, and do you have any recommendations for securing backups?
Sure. So with respect to ransomware, I believe we will continue to see these trends with respect to ransomware continuing to increase going into 2025, right? Now, especially with respect and financial services expanding their use of cloud computing, mobile applications, as well as systems being interconnected more than ever, and also the prevalent use of APIs across the board, the attack surface has only grown ever larger. Further, with respect to the primary reasons, I would say why we are seeing an increasing trend is also the availability of ransomware as a service that is lower the barrier significantly, barrier for entry, right? So it is enabling even less skilled actors to launch ever more sophisticated attacks. Now, today, Optiv, we are working with organizations to help them develop a ransomware recovery plan, where we work with them to identify and prioritize what are the critical systems and how should they go about recovering those, right? We are also looking at working with organizations and having them, with respect to controls, having them implement repute. And when we're saying backup software, looking at features such as immutability, encryption, continuous monitoring, in the case of detection of unauthorized items, as well as having the capability to automatically put in version controls as well, right? Now, one other thing with respect to financial sector, I think we would need to start simulating not just broader incident response plans and tabletop exercises, but simulate very specific ransomware. How are we going to be evaluating whether our backups and recovery processes are working as intended, and not just the systems and processes, but at the end of the day, you also want to ensure your people are ready to implement those processes when a disruption does occur, right? So I think those are paramount. The financial services stays on top of being able to recover from ransomware attacks.
Yeah, I love these insights, how we have to focus not only on our tooling and our software, like with the versioning and encryption, all of these things to make those backups more secure, but also the training aspect, like we've discussed, and how I like how you're framing the incident response and recovery process. It's not just a one-time thing or an annual type of thing. This is a continual type of process that organizations need to be thinking about and continually improving. And building upon that line of thinking, Danny, from your perspective as an incident management director, do you have any guidance on proactive incident response planning that takes into account these trends with threat actors targeting backups and some of these other trends we're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. And Pradeep, you're not wrong, right? It really comes down to people, processes, and technology, right? And when we look at the proactive nature of incident response, we try to heavily focus on the people and the processes portion of it, right? So when we're looking at recovery and restoration and how that plays into the incident management world, it should be a part of your IR plan, right? Your overall shaping operational plan of what do we do in the event of an incident. And it's not just, who are the people in communications, who are the people on the board that need to be making good judgment-based decisions on what's happening. But outside of the security team, who needs to be involved in recovery, right? Who do we call from the IT side? Who are the third parties that we need to get involved? Whether it's our breach coach, it's our insurance provider, it's third parties that are providing any types of services into the organization, both from a security or an IT or OT perspective. Then coming a little bit more tactical, right, at the playbook level, Pradeep made the point of understanding what those processes are. They need to be documented and they need to be followed. And the playbooks specifically around ransomware need to include what needs to be involved from a very, very specific workflow perspective on how we get these key systems back up and operational. And then the final portion of that really is testing those plans and those playbooks. And in the incident response world, we do that through tabletop exercises. And so as organizations look to have their annual tabletop exercise, whether they do it in-house or they use a third party to come in and run those tabletops for them, that absolutely needs to be a part of those exercises, right? You can go through and pull out your plan and pull out your playbook and go through what an incident response team, what a SOC member needs to do in the event of an incident. But parallel to that is where that recovery and that restoration happens, right? You're going to be investigating, you're going to be conducting your forensics, you're going to be hunting through the environment to ensure that the adversary doesn't maintain a foothold. And simultaneously, we need to get business back up and running, right? So we need to look at those systems, whether it's Active Directory, whether it's DNS, whether it's the virtual environment that you have back up and running, so that you have the least bit of downtime, the least bit of monetary damage to the organization as possible. So concentrate not only on the plans and the playbooks, but you got to test it and you got to run it through your tabletop exercises.
Very important to focus on the testing piece as well. And you can also, building upon what you were sharing, it's interesting how this industry threat profile, it provides quite a bit of open source threat intelligence. I'm also always interested in ways that the threat intelligence can help inform how you are shaping those incident response playbooks and your tabletop exercises, all of these things. How is it based on these real world threats that we're seeing? And so that's where I think that, as organizations are shaping their planning for the new year, this resource can be really great for you as a supplement and a resource to help you to strengthen your plans. And the last kind of industry spotlight that I want to focus on is on the government and public sector. Cyber attacks in this industry, they pose a significant threat due to their critical role in maintaining societal infrastructure, law enforcement, emergency relief, and so much more. And these agencies and organizations are continuing to digitize their operations and adopt AI and cloud technologies. And so my first question is starting with you, Danny, that government and public sector organizations often hold sensitive data and intelligence that could be valuable to state-sponsored threat actors. To what extent are we continuing to see trends in state-sponsored campaigns in this sector in particular, and how have the techniques evolved over time, if at all?
Yeah, well, espionage has always been a thing, right? When you're looking at state-on-state activity, it's been there, from the times of where we pull information out of the Art of War from Sun Tzu or whatever, right? Now, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but it's something that's always going to be there. And it's not just state to state, right? But it's evolved into corporate espionage. I don't see this trend waning at all over the coming years. I mean, we've talked about the global state of conflict across the world right now, whether it's forceful pressure from China against Taiwan. You see the conflict in Ukraine and Russia. You see some of the things that have transpired in the Middle East with a large shift in how some of those conflicts are going just recently over the past week. With the fall of the Assad regime there in Syria. But when we look from a technical capability, and we look at a cyber capability, one of the trends that I see continuously evolving and that I think is going to continue on in 2025 is really adversaries' focus on defense evasion, right? We've seen a lot of concentration with code and certain types of activities, both on the dark web as well as in publicly available spaces, talking about evasion of EDR, right? When you look at campaigns that are targeting and manipulating EDR services to interrupt that particular set of tooling, to reduce logging capabilities and cover activities inside the logs. I think that's going to be a heavy focus. And so organizations need to really prioritize their detections and engineering around what those EDR systems are doing, regardless of what particular tool that you have in-house, as well as what your logging infrastructure looks like, how long you're maintaining logs, and how you're really understanding and detecting when some of that is being manipulated, so that we don't have folks living off the land for a very long amount of time inside your environment.
Exactly. I feel like there's been a lot of successes in the EDR market. There are a lot of tools that are helping you to kind of defend your perimeter and whatnot. But you also have to be thinking about these defense evasion techniques and the living off the land, and how are they getting in and kind of manipulating some of those tools to be able to kind of hide in your system, and how do you kind of check for that? Absolutely. And Pradeep, kind of building upon that, are there other things that you're seeing from your perspective of when it comes to the techniques being used for espionage or state-sponsored campaigns?
Yeah, with respect to state-sponsored campaigns, I know Danny already covered, but the predominant, I would say, with respect to nation purpose of espionage, which Danny did cover, with respect to getting an economic advantage, as well as say some of them are using it as part of military strategy, as we saw in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and as well as political disruption, right? And predominantly, the focus of these campaigns continue to be on critical infrastructure of the various countries, as well as on the supply chain, so that they can go about disrupting the normal mode of business operations. We're also seeing them focusing on theft of intellectual property, as well as running several influence operations and disinformation campaigns, so that they can destabilize the political systems and basically eroding public trust in these systems across these democratic countries. So, with respect to the techniques and the evolution of techniques, what we are seeing them use is they've started to weaponize vulnerabilities. They started to develop a lot of vector attacks so that it enables them to maximize their success rates, and also to have them obtain get persistence within the targets, right? Each of the different targets that they're going after. Now, over the years, and right now, we're starting to see them using AI-driven malware, as well as custom-built exploit kits, and finally exploiting cloud infrastructure, right? Which is where they're driving a lot of these botnet-induced attacks, from where they're initiating these attacks across the board.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about how, with these new tools that are coming out, how our adversaries continuing to make their attacks more sophisticated and try using these new techniques and enhance some of their existing and age-old methods in some ways. And we got a question in the chat, and if you have any questions, please keep them coming, because we are transitioning into the Q&A period at this point. We might discuss one more question, but Brandon was mentioning something that I think is compelling. You need more than just tabletop. I mean, we talked, Danny, Pradeep, we were earlier about the importance of testing, and Brandon's making a similar comment that we need playbooks need to be tested with authorized red box testing. Curious to hear from the panel any thoughts on that, any other kinds of testing mechanisms that you find really valuable for incident response.
No, I think that's a great point, Brandon, and thanks for bringing that up. It kind of a reminder there, right? We talk about the proactive aspect of what is incident response, but I think it's just if not more important to really do what we call these live fire exercises, or these live testings, right? Where you have a red team come in and emulate certain types of attacks that are going to be prevalent inside your organization, right? One of the things that we discuss, and I know Pradeep knows very, very well, is when we look at the best route to kind of utilize intelligence as a portion of your security team is to really understand who are the adversaries, what are they after, and what are the historic TTPs that they utilize. So if you're going to look at where you sit globally, you're going to look at what industry you sit in. Your intel team's going to be able to very, very quickly tell you, hey, here are the top 5 adversaries that we need to worry about based off of previous campaigns, based off of previous incidents that we've had to deal with. And you want to be able to test against that, right? So your red teamers are going to be able to emulate those types of tests. And I would take it even a step further and go, not just strictly with a red team perspective, but maybe do a purple team, right? Because you not want to just test your controls that you have implemented via technology, but you also want to test your defenders, right? And so having that combination of taking a week to 10 days of time to really sit down and go through one or two different scenarios that are of most value to protect against, and have a red team come in and emulate some type of real world attack inside your network while you're simultaneously dusting off that response plan, looking at those playbooks, and utilizing your blue team to defend against it in real time. while also adding in a component of what would be necessary from a restoration and recovery perspective, is spot on. So, Brandon, appreciate you bringing that up. Pradeep, if there's anything that you would like to add on top of that, sir.
Yeah, I'm good, Danny. I think you covered it pretty well.
Yeah, that's excellent advice because I think that the scenario based kind of testing and also the red team and blue team aspect of your testing. We love purple teaming here, and I think that it's great to think about how can you have adversaries emulate real world threats and be able to test your systems and be able to influence your incident response. It's more than just the tabletop. The tabletop is going to be given, but there's a lot more that you can explore to really enhance your incident response planning and recovery processes. And feel free, like I mentioned, if you have any questions or comments, please share them in the chat. We have one more question that we're going to discuss. So, as we've explored throughout this conversation, we've observed a lot of ways that organizations are investing in digital transformations and innovations, managed services and third-party resources to lighten the load on security teams and speed up investigations, modernize the SOC, so many other aspects of security. But we've also seen that adding these new tools and resources can increase the attack surface for organizations. So it's a big question, but from your perspective, what are some actionable recommendations that you have for enterprise and small, medium-sized businesses? Pradeep, starting with you.
Yeah, sure. Now, and again, you'll see this in the report as well, but broadly, what we are advising in order to minimize the impact of cyber attacks, right? So we're looking at three fundamental steps. And these are very basic, but what we are going as the steps identifying what is at risk for you as an organization, as well as what are your credentials, what are you trying to protect the most, which provides you what the business context is, right? Next, we're looking at, like Danny mentioned, what are the threat techniques that are prevalent in your industry, in your geographical region, which provides you, those are the things that you would want to protect against, and those advise you and provide guidance on what kind of controls you need to put in place. But finally, the most important thing is not just having controls, but continuously networks as well as your applications, so that you're looking for vulnerabilities, which provides you your overall security context. Now, this is something that we are having a I would say advising as a broader strategy, if you would, at each of the different industries. Now, depending on the techniques that you see in specific industry, you would want to have specific focus areas, right? Now, in the report, our report this year, you will find an actionable set of priority focus areas and controls that are aligned to the SUS 18 safeguards for each industry, which will give you a pretty good starting point on what are controls that you could focus on and start off implementing them or refresh against what you already have in place.
Yeah, like you were saying, those kind of heat maps that we have, not only the geographic heat maps, but also the security controls heat maps that are mapped to the CIS 18 controls. Here's an example of what that looks like for the energy and utilities industry. So you can see which ones would be the highest priority, medium priority for your organization based on the open source threat intelligence that we provide across industries and the technological innovations and capabilities that we address. So really great to see that. And Danny, kind of as we close out, are there any other kinds of final thoughts, actionable strategies that you can recommend for organizations to develop a threat-informed defense?
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is a good way to kind of close this one out, if we don't have any other questions that come in from the audience here. But I think one thing that we really need to consider, that has been known for quite some time, is adversaries do target widely known and historical vulnerabilities, right? In most cases, a lot of those are 2+ years old that are still actively being exploited out in the wild. This is a trend that our internal GTIC, or our Global Threat Intelligence Center, has been tracking for several years, but still seems to be problematic for several organizations. So, as you conduct that internal analysis that Pradeep just spoke of and that I had mentioned earlier, your Intel team, if you have one, or if you use an outside one, really needs to work hand in hand with that vulnerability management service or that vulnerability management team that you have internally to really identify a lot of those legacy vulnerabilities that might not have been patched and get those on your prioritization lists for that patching, especially those that are known to be exploited very, very actively. Shameless plug, right? One thing that you can do is go to optiv.com, and on the blog, our GTIC has put out a prioritized list of software services that should be really looked at. And they go so far as to match those up with some MITRE tactics as well, so that you can kind of start there and get an understanding and build a plan to go ahead and prioritize those, see if those are still gaps inside your environment, and get those shut down relatively quickly.
Yeah, I think that's great advice to be thinking about how the vulnerability management and the threat intelligence pieces of your security program need to go hand in hand. We also got a cool comment, Brandon, in the chat, using the Optiv report heat maps and using gap analysis to measure your current detections and SOC processes. It's a great way to start the conversation and see where we can help fix those gaps. Absolutely. That's a wonderful way to close out this discussion. Thank you for sharing that. So Pradeep and Danny, thank you for an excellent conversation on the 2024 industry threat profile. We will have links in the chat, and in the on-demand version, there'll be plenty of ways for you to access this report and to be able to see what's your industry's threat profile and how are these different threats, how are they impacting your industry, and what can you do about it? What are the controls that you need to prioritize? If you're interested in learning more about cybersecurity solutions that fit your needs, please connect with us at optiv.com. Have a wonderful rest of your day and happy holidays.